All right, welcome everybody to our presentation here on transferring wealth, transferring generational wealth. I got Brian Cox here. I'm gonna let Brian share his background, I'll just first say this: one of the smartest guys I know. My family is a client of his firm. We trust him and his team to take care of us. And what we're going to talk about today is things that we talk about on a minimum quarterly basis. But every time I'm going to make a big decision, I'm reaching out to Brian for his feedback. And so he's graciously given us his time to shine some light on a few topics that I think are topics of the moment that we've had people come to us on. And I just want to dive deep into some of those so that we can give that to you all so you can make smarter decisions. So, Brian, first, thank you. I'm grateful that you're spending this time, but will you share a little bit about your background and then, the firm that you co-founded and
Sure.
what you do?
Yeah, not to get too technical, but we technically bought the practice from the founder, but I joined it about 14 years ago, and I had served in the military like you. I think that's how we originally met, is through West Point channels. Served as you did. Actually got called back to active duty in 2004 to go to Baghdad. But prior to that, I earned my MBA at Michigan, and then worked on Wall Street for a few years. So frankly, I met the original founder of our firm, I don't know, 25, maybe even 30 years ago. And he taught me about what's called fee only, which is one of the many models you can engage a firm for. I think they're all wonderful, but this one resonated with me, and I pulled him aside years ago and said, "Hey, I'd like to come work for you." And he said, "Well, what the heck do you know about this stuff?" And I really didn't know much about it. So went off, got my MBA, went worked on Wall Street. Then I worked for a couple of different hedge funds, and here I am. So I joined this firm again about 14 years ago. I now have two partners. One's in Lubbock, one is in Houston area. We serve clients across the country. One of the things that folks have learned is that your financial planner and many other intellectual property type advisors don't necessarily need to live down the street from you. I happen to live down the street from you, but we have clients across the country, and we tend to really enjoy getting pretty deeply involved with the full spectrum of not just investments. Obviously, we'll talk today about one's home and real estate, but that's one of many aspects. There's, of course, estate planning, which we'll talk about again today. There's also insurance and tax. And of course, the general goal plan, which I'll talk about, I presume, on, because for us, that's what drives everything, is establishing a goal plan and then following and supporting that. Hopefully that's not too long-winded of an answer.
No. I think it's helpful. I just thought to ask too, and I'll share my answer to this, but how can someone actually pick the right partner for them? I mean, when I approach this, I think you and I have a similar mindset on several things, personally and professionally, and just in the way that we're approaching building wealth and why we're doing it. So that all resonated with me. You just happen to have the skill set that I need, and that's why we're in business together.
Right.
But if you were to coach one of these folks on how to pick the right advisor for them, what would you say? Like, let's just say the top two things they should look for.
Sure. So it starts with, what are your needs and what do you value as far as services that are out there? And quite frankly, don't overpay for what it is that our industry is notorious for being, opaque, non-transparent about what are you paying these folks. So I think knowing what that is and knowing what you're going to get for it are the two things. And certainly I'm happy to help folks with that. We see that as a community service, as corny as that sounds. We know this world very well. We kind of see of ourselves as sort of like general practitioners in medicine, but for finance. So, feel free to reach out to me. I have 9 people at my firm. Any of us can help you figure it out. We do try to help folks figure it out, and certainly not everyone's a fit for every firm. So,
yep. Okay, good. All right. I I want to jump into real estate specifically, but before we do that, on the estate planning, um, when do you think someone should reasonably start to think about that for themselves? And then what are the just couple of core components that you think
Yeah.
people should start with?
That's, yeah, it's a great question. So, believe it or not, I have two sons in college, and both of them have what we'll call ancillary documents. We have a whole body of knowledge we've created around your kids going to college and/or planning for if they're young. But I learned this the hard way. But my son went to Texas A&M and had a health issue, or actually, to be completely straightforward, it was more a friend of his had an issue, and you just can't get information if you don't have basic ancillary documents like a medical power of attorney. So, that very basic. Again, don't overpay for that. You could even do those online, and then your estate plan needs evolve as you become more complex in what it is. One of the things that we'll talk about today, in my opinion, is not that complex, but there's a lot of optimizations that you can consider with respect to getting parents help, for example, on a first home. But again, just like with financial planning, get what it is that you need done, pay for that and not more. You don't need the highest end attorney to build a basic will. And I would argue that you may not even need a will if you aren't married, don't have kids, but you probably need some basic estate, ancillary documents, durable power of attorney, HIPAA release, things like that.
Yeah. Well, so you kind of you beat around the bush on it a little bit, but as people approach their estate planning, what are some common mistakes that they make, or assumptions they make that end up getting them?
Yeah. So the biggest thing we see is a lack of communication amongst family members. And on top of that, a failure to really put into writing what is in your mind as far as what you want to happen. I promise you that whatever state you live in, the state's government does whatever they're going to do. If you don't write it down, is not 100% aligned with what you want to happen. And that's not because, any other reason, but how could they know, right? I mean, my father passed away right before COVID, and about 2 years before that, he'd had a stroke and thankfully fully recovered. So I flew out immediately and I sat down with him. I'll never forget. I was in a diner and I said, we're filling out this, your wishes in terms of where do you want to be buried, et cetera. He was buried at West Point. These are the kind of things that are not fun to talk about, but I would argue they're very selfless to put in writing because, it helps those that you leave behind. And that's really the goal of all this, is get it in writing. Even if you just write it, hand jam it on a piece of paper, it's better than not having any documentation.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm hearing, so to say it back to you, they just wait too long to do what they need to do, or they let the emotional piece of it stop them from doing it.
It's so easy to put it off.
Yeah.
And when we onboard clients, we first establish a goal plan. Then we work on tax, insurance, estate, and estate is almost always the thing that people, I'll get to, and they do get to it. It may take them 3 years, but we try to hold them accountable to establishing a plan. It's particularly acute with blended families. We have a client who's getting married literally this weekend, and that they onboarded maybe in the last few months, and they that became the priority because it is a blended family. And I don't know if that terminology means anything to the group, but it's it's particularly an issue as far as what do you want stepchildren versus blood children, et cetera, to receive, and how much it's tricky, and it's really important to get on the same page.
Yeah. I think for me personally, we spent so much time and effort on growing wealth and learning how to grow wealth that it actually took a mentor teaching me this to finally put some effort toward it. But he once told me, Scott, you'll notice that there are some people out there that know how to make money, and then there are a different group of people that know how to protect money. There are very few people that know how to make it and protect it, but you know their names because they're, because they keep what they make. And when I heard that, I had spent no time on protecting money, zero. And so then I went down the rabbit hole of like trying to optimize myself tax wise, how to protect what I built for my children and my wife if I were not to be here tomorrow. Um, Up until that point, I'd always looked at it as an expense, not a wealth builder. But that changed my mindset a little bit. I don't know if that resonates with you and some of your other clients, but that's the way that I had to approach it. Was somebody else had to tell me that.
Absolutely, and I will tell you that I'm an obnoxiously positive person, but I get very almost nitpicky when it comes to this side of things, because I do think the rules and the laws are more complex than they should be, but they are. And so you have to plan, and a good rule of thumb is build the plan again after you have a full goal plan, which of course includes what is your balance sheet, what do you own, what are your liabilities, and then revisit that every 4 to 5 years. You don't want to obsess over these things every year, in my opinion, but it does drive me a little bit nuts that, I mean, there's so much of quite a balancing act that has to be achieved, to your point about what does it cost to do this and what is the benefit?
Yeah. I don't overly sweat the updating of it. What I do is I just try to send you updates on what we're working on, and then you'll tell me if I need to update it. So
and that's an important point, is that it's not just updating the documents. You have to follow through. As you know, we've worked with you on this, on updating account titles, updating beneficiary designations. A lot of folks do not know that when you have an IRA or a 401k or even an insurance plan, whatever those documents say when you bought those policies or bought into that IRA, as far as where's that money supposed to go if you pass, that supersedes any will. If your will says, it's supposed to go to one person, and you're literally, you've documented within the fund, then the whatever you put in the fund is absolutely going to override. It's called a non-probate asset. So really important to not just get the plan done, but then follow through. This is what, again, an advisor can help you with in all the details associated with that.
Yeah. Okay. Kind of the topic of the moment that we've heard, I think I heard it like a dozen times, and then I called you and said, "Hey man, can we jump on the cam together and talk about this?" We've got this demographic of folks in their mid, some folks even in their late 20s. Some families, some individuals have come to us, and they want to buy a house, and we later find out that their parents are a part of the transaction in some way. Either they're gifting them money, or they're like a co-borrower or a co-buyer. They're on the title. I've seen it all different ways, but we've experienced it enough now that we're like, okay, well, this is a trend. Real estate's expensive, especially here in Austin. There's not very many people that just get into the job market that have enough to go buy a starter home in Austin. With it being $500,000 is the average price around here. So I wanted to bring you on and ask you, if I'm a child that's trying to buy a property and I want to recommend something to my parents for them to help me with this, or if I'm a parent of a child and they're trying to buy something, and I want to transfer some of my wealth to them through this process. One, is that a good idea? And two, what should we be thinking, or how should we do that?
You bet. So there's really three, I'm sure there's more than three, but the three primary ways I have seen it. First of all, I think this is a wonderful gift that a parent can provide, even if they're just helping them with it. It's a heck of a way to launch them, because it's become such a high percentage of folks' income. So the first way to do it would be, if you're going to help, for example, on a down payment, a key number is to understand what you can give to really anybody, including your kids, annually without any tax implications to you or your child. And that number is $18,000 per person. So as a couple, as a married couple, I could give to my son $36,000 for a down payment, and there's no it's just part of the tax code. So if you go beyond that for any particular person, you have to record it into what's called a lifetime exemption. So try not to confuse. There are some numbers here, but to the extent that you're going to want to do more than that 36,000, which would be a wonderful help on a down payment. If you want to do more than that, then you would then need to record it as part of your lifetime gift. That number right now is sorry, I wrote it down because it changes every year. $13.61 million. I know that's a lot of money, but to the extent that folks have a net worth above that, then you start to talk about what's called an estate tax. So just, again, as $27 million as a couple, bottom line is if you go beyond that 18,000, 36,000 as a couple, you have to start to record this lifetime gift. So those are important numbers to know. That number, by the way, is going up to 14 million next year, 28 as a couple, and then it's going to drop. I just want the group, those folks that are listening in, that is, not a certainty, but we are planning for that number to drop to 14 million as a couple. Call it 7 million, maybe a bit more. So that's just a dynamic to be aware of as folks and parents are thinking about their lifetime gift. This could be a way to sort of get in front of that tax law change, which is likely at the end of 2025. So the third way to help a child of a client, is to loan them the money. Bottom line is that the government requires you to use what's called an applicable federal rate so that you're not gifting, meaning, let's say right now rates are about, you tell me, they're about 6-7% for a mortgage, right?
Yeah.
So, parents can say, well, I don't want to charge my kid that much money. I want to charge him 5. Well, that has to be counted against a table that's literally generated every month. And as long as it's above that number or at that number, the applicable federal rate, then it's not considered a gift. And the neat thing about that is it can be a win-win. A lot of parents are, they like the idea of having some income, and that if you apply that applicable federal rate, then they'd get some income. It's not considered a gift. So that's the other way to do it. Again, some parents, certainly, are perhaps going to charge a bit more than that. It's all in a discussion with the kids, but those are, in my opinion, the most straightforward ways. There are other ways to structure this that get a bit more complicated. In my experience, again, I've been doing this about 20 years. These things that are hard to keep up with are often overly complex. We try to keep estate planning as simple as we can when we can.
Yeah. So going back to that rate, if we just did it like the 10-year treasury rate, like if we just use that, which is, I think it's like 4.25 right now, like that would be a reasonable rate.
Yeah. And again, it's published every month by the government, believe it or not. And I probably should have looked it up as far as what it is this month, but there's a short-term rate and a long-term rate, but it is always a lower than the market.
Okay.
It's really, I think, set. I know for a fact it's set by the IRS, but it's partly driven by, what is the Fed funds rate, what is LIBOR, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, if it's below the 10-year treasury, then it's close to inflation, and it's a free loan anyways.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a deal vis-a-vis the market. And again, the other thing that I have a client who called yesterday. He's a home builder, and there's a whole market now of people that are willing to loan money for, and I know you do this in some of your projects, because the banks have gotten to be, with all due respect, pretty difficult to get the mind-numbing forms that have to be filled out. It becomes quite a drag. So there's a market there that's kind of been created between between that applicable federal rate and what a bank might charge. And I'm not just talking about the interest rate. I'm talking about the time that it takes to get to that point where you have a construction loan or whatever you are looking for.
Yeah. What about buying it in the trust, the family trust, and then the kids just living there? I mean, what hurdles or obstacles would be in that?
Yeah. So, there's, that particular solution, I think I should talk about a thing called a step-up in basis that can weigh into this decision. And it's something that is not very well understood, but when your parents own something that they want to give you, and in this case, let's say they have a home, or that they want to buy a home that they know is going to appreciate, or usually real estate does appreciate, upon their passing, if they own it, they can pass it to their heirs with there's no tax. It certainly could be part of the estate tax depending on their wealth picture. But the important thing is, when you receive something from someone who has passed, and they don't have to be related to you, it's as if you paid for it that day, and whatever it was worth that day, the basis, which is really just a nice way of saying the cost, steps up to what it was that day. So you have to get valuation, but think about it, again, like let's say, for example, you have a grandparent that has a home that they paid a fraction of what it's worth now. I've seen this a couple of times in my career. Oh, let me give this to my grandson or granddaughter. That's not a good idea, because then if you gift it before you pass, they assume the basis or cost that the grandparent had. So enormous tax difference. That law could change. Certainly that has been contemplated by our politicians, but it's still effective. Hopefully that makes sense. Ultimately, what I'm saying is that, putting it into a trust, has a number of benefits. The biggest one is that it's creditor protected. Although if it's your primary residence, you're in Texas, you're creditor protected anyway. That's not true of all states. We have clients in New York, and I couldn't believe when I learned that your primary residence is not creditor protected in New York, but it's not. So depends on the state. But, I do like the solution. However, it does add complexity. And again, what we're talking about here is an irrevocable trust, right? An irrevocable trust has, it really cannot be reversed. There's a case right now with, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the family that owns Fox News, but they're trying to reverse an irrevocable trust, and it's very difficult to do. So putting it into a revocable trust, which can be changed during your lifetime, is a way to dictate where the asset would go upon your passing. It is a way to, again, your kids can live in it. And in the revocable trust, you're saying, hey, this is where it's going to go. And then upon your passing, you could, that is a way to do it. Again, we're obviously talking about a very different wealth picture of someone who can just buy a house for their kid. I'm not trying to, glaze over that. That's perhaps applicable to some of the folks that are on, perhaps not. And that's kind of why we've gone through all three examples. We've gone through a loan, which again could help the parents. We've gone through, the annual gift, and then we've also gone through bigger numbers than that. Again, maybe it is put into a revocable trust. And again, I'm not an estate attorney, but I would say that it's rare. You really need to kind of consult with folks that know your specific situation to really figure out the best solution.
Yep. One more hypothetical. I know I've got some friends that started contributing to their children's cash policy, their life insurance cash policies very early. And it was with the mindset that a child, when they're of age, they could draw on that, take a loan up against it and use that as money that, just that money's basically gifted to them, just in a different way. What are your thoughts on that? What might be the issues if someone were to pursue that course of action?
So I would say first and foremost, a life insurance policy, primary purpose should be to provide liquidity to a family that might need it if someone were to pass. That's the first thing. Certainly there is a borrow against it component. You can do that without tax implications, but there is always an interest rate applicable to that borrowing. Lately, it's become very expensive. Yeah. At the end of the day,
but it's not a loan that you can be denied for. Essentially,
yeah,
you can afford it on a monthly basis.
Correct. So the short answer is, if you have a whole life policy, because again, in your overall financial plan, it makes sense. There are points and examples where it does make sense. Then yes, that can be a tool. But again, at the end of the day, it's possible. I actually have a client in Austin who's going through this where he's borrowed against it, and in his case, it was his own policy, and he's getting charged 8-9%. Which is not as attractive as this applicable federal rate that we've already talked about.
Yeah,
that makes sense. So again, all I'm saying is, at the end of the day, the insurance companies do a wonderful job of managing all this, but obviously having that intermediary, there has to be a cost to that, right? And that's there's benefits. We believe there's literally no free lunch. So the costs, and benefits have to make sense.
Yeah. Maybe let me put you on the spot, because you have 2 children that are making college life decisions.
Yeah.
Has it ever crossed your mind to say, hey, you know what, I'm actually going to buy a place for them, while they go to school, and has that crossed your mind, or how would you approach it, as father?
Yeah, I did that. Yeah, I did that. I bought a condo in College Station, and the thinking with that was, certainly owning it 4 years. Maybe he finds folks to rent with him. To me, it's certainly it's scary. It's striking to me how expensive housing is, in most college towns. You're a captive audience. The rest of that story is not that interesting, but basically, instead of my son staying there 4 years, he transferred. I don't really want to keep up with a condo in College Station. I'm not an Aggie, so I don't have as much of a reason anymore to go to the games, et cetera. So I sold it. I did break even, but just again, ultimately, yes, I personally did that. It was an interest rate environment, which was lower than it is now. So it kind of became a no-brainer. And thankfully, I would say I kind of got a little bit lucky in the sense that he didn't stay there all 4 years, and I did break even. So hopefully that answers your question. But I do think it's certainly worth considering, because student housing far outpaces inflation. I was just in Ann Arbor for the Michigan-Texas game, and it never it seems to just continue to outstrip any normal housing market.
Yeah. What I've noticed, at least here in Austin, is that student housing, the value has stayed down, but to your point, the rents are super high. So you make, as an investor, you make all your return on the cash flows. You don't make the return on appreciation, because the only person you could sell it to is an investor, and they all want a deal on the price.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm hearing you say is it should be a consideration. It should always be a consideration. Maybe not a must, but
for sure. And I would just say that, what I've been humbled by is that, there are just things that happen. This is really why I love financial planning, is that, life happens, and, adjusting in the face of that is a big part of it. And so, when you make these decisions, I believe a financial planner's job is to get in front of and do all the front analysis so you can make a sound economic decision.
Yeah.
But there's also an emotional component that is just as important. And so again, in this case, my son leaving A&M, certainly, I could have held on to that. I wouldn't say I was not emotional about him leaving Texas A&M. I was more, from an economic perspective, I probably should have just held on to it. I had renters, but I just didn't, again, I just didn't really want to mess with driving it there, to check on it. And that's kind of just a good example. That's all.
Yeah. I just from my perspective, I think in an investment, hassle always has to be a part of the equation. It can't just be return.
Yeah, and I would also say that, in your financial goal plan, probably on an annual basis, look at all of your assets that you own and make sure that, just like with insurance, it's not inertia that's keeping these things in your portfolio, in your balance sheet. It's an active decision of, is this working out the way that you wanted it to?
What about if I'm a parent and I'm asked to co-sign on a loan, a traditional mortgage with my children? What general thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, I mean, I did that for my son on an apartment. Obviously, as soon as he could have and had established his own credit, we came off of it. Obviously, there's the obvious risk of things that go on the property that end up being your issue. But we didn't have any of that. I think the broader question really is, as soon as your kids graduate from high school, they really should begin to establish their own credit. I'm a big fan of Credit Karma. It's a free app that essentially uses an algorithm to figure out what your credit score is. But that's a tool for your kids to begin to develop. The other thing I wanted to say about that is, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. At the end of the day, when you co-sign, basically it is something that you're putting your name and credit score on the line. So, or on, it could go down as a result of things that might happen in the property. So, but I think it's a very sound tool. It really is something that you can do to kind of help your kids launch.
Yeah. If I'm a child and I have this opportunity, is there any reason why I would not take advantage of it? If my parents are willing to make the loan or give me a down payment, or you name it, is there any reason why I wouldn't do this?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can think of, there is really no economic reason. There is always an emotional component of, recognizing and establishing that as a thing that can make your dynamic with your kids awkward, whatever you want to call it. And that's something that we have seen. We have seen it kind of go sideways because, there was just, again, it's about communication. We said that in the very beginning. Estate planning, all these things. Families are generally not very good about talking about these things. It's an awkward thing to talk about. So I always tell the story about how I have my best friend growing up. We actually ended up going to West Point and living in New York City at the same time when we first got out of the Army and grad school. And I don't really know a lot about his balance sheet, even though he's my best friend. I know a lot of things about him that are experiences we've had, but it's that private, right? So when you have a financial planner that knows these very intimate details about your, it's the same thing with knowing that and really being able to make good plans, optimized plans. It's applicable for every generation. So to the extent that you can communicate with your kids on these things, then I think that's almost always better.
Yeah. Anything else you think I should be asking, or you think is important just in this topic in general? that people should consider?
Yeah, let's see. I took some notes here. I've already kind of talked about the credit score component. Talked about communication. Let's see here. Again, I think it's probably important just to emphasize that, all of these things that one might do really should be it should start with a goal plan of, is the capital that you're allocating towards this, I'll call it a transaction, is it, how does it fit in with the overall plan? Because, we see a lot of inefficiency in these things. And again, that's a big part of it. That's life, right? You get busy, I think, this, but just the simple fact of paying attention to where your cash is parked can make a big, big difference in the pie that sort of ends up going to where you want it to go. A big part of what we really haven't addressed, but it's a certainty in our lives, all of our financial lives, is that whatever it is that you have accumulated is going to go to one of three places when you pass. It's either going to go to your kids, if you have them. It's going to go to a charity, a church, or the IRS, and taxes. And Schuyler and I both served. We're believers in paying taxes. But again, back to what we said in the very beginning, our system is way more complex than it should be. And if you don't pay attention to these things, you're probably going to overpay in taxes more than you are required to. Yeah. And so, that's kind of full circle back to, an estate plan. That's what you're doing. You're basically saying, okay, I want this to go to my kids. Yeah. And there is a way to establish your will and your estate plan such that, you can mitigate your taxes to the, upon passing by making these plans and by establishing, maybe it's a charity. This is something that Schuyler, and your group is amazing about recognizing the importance of that and establishing, a legacy in terms of what, beyond helping your kids with a home, what do you want them to receive? And as I'm talking, I will say, part of this that is also emotional is you want to make sure that you're not demotivating your kids to become productive members of society. I actually have 3 sons, 2 are in college, and I never can pronounce his name correctly, but there's a comedian named Nate Bargatze, I think is how you pronounce it. He's so funny. And he talks about the difference between your firstborn kid's financial life and your youngest. And you have to be mindful of the fact that, generally speaking, you're probably going to be doing better once your youngest is, and, paying attention to, I think the worst thing you can do is spoil your kid. Hopefully I'm not speaking too controversially. I think it's something I'm really, really vigilant about with my boys.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I find myself having this conversation often, but if I would run my personal life like I run my business, I'd be much more dogged on the things that probably matter at home, right? And this is what I'm going to sum it up, but this is what you said, like, hey, you have to have a vision, right? For when it's all said and done, this is how it's going to play out. So you have this vision, and then you've been harping on the plan. The plan is how we're going to make the vision a reality. And then as we operate that, the plan may change a little bit, as we move closer to the end. But we're going to have these values as a family, right? That kind of drive the way that we action on things. But it's all in pursuit of a vision, this outcome that we want. And I think that what I've found is some of our clients, their parents want to, they're going to leave something to them, and they're trying to find ways to get it to them a little bit earlier. Not in a way to spoil them, but just like to your point at the very beginning, set them up for success. You know, it's like the old analogy, you know, when was the best time to plant a tree? You know, it's 50 years ago, but what's the next best time? Like right now. I mean, you know, owning real estate over time, you know, if history continues to produce itself in the future, you know, it's a good deal, you know, own it.
Yeah, let me add to that, because, you know, we look at investments across all asset classes. And one of the things that I always tell clients is that I believe real estate will always be inefficient, which is a corny and lexicon finance way of saying there will always be deals out there. And a big part of that is because, you know, essentially there's potentially dynamics of, you know, family doesn't get along and they have to sell a property or not that you want to take advantage of negative things, but that there are always life events that create the conditions for what we call motivated sellers and buyers. So I believe it will always be inefficient. And I certainly, you know, but I also believe that, and a part of our discipline we try to introduce is pay attention to how much of it is made up in your portfolio and manage that concentration risk as well. And it's okay to exceed, you know, parameters, but just knowing that actively is a big part of that. But yeah, absolutely. I think real estate is, you know, always going to be inefficient. That means you can make very above market returns is what I'll call it. You just have to be mindful of things like what happened to me, where my son didn't stay 4 years, so I didn't make, you know, certainly though, if I compare that to the amount that I would have paid for a dorm or an apartment in College Station, you know, certainly from an opportunity cost, I was better off.
Yeah. That makes sense. No, it does. Okay. How can we follow you, or, you know, how can people get in touch with your firm, or, you know, just see what you're doing?
Yeah, we're pretty, appreciate you asking. We're pretty active on LinkedIn in terms of generating thought pieces. We also have an email distribution for folks who are not a big fan of LinkedIn. We actually are also on Instagram and Facebook. You know, certainly I'm happy to share those as a follow-up in terms of the linkages. It's probably easier to do it that way. We have a new younger colleague who has started the Instagram more recently. You know, LinkedIn is something we've always had, and, you know, thought pieces we have. I was just, all of the tax tables have literally been published in the last day or two in terms of what is your marginal tax bracket. So, you know, we have a meeting every month to talk, or every week to talk about these things, but I think publishing those and that kind of thing is really useful data. So that's the kind of thing that you would see, as well as, if you don't mind me sharing, there's a way to give charitably, which I know that you know, but perhaps some folks don't know. But you can, instead of writing a check to a charity, which costs you your marginal tax rate plus that dollar. In other words, in order to free up $1 to give to charity, you had to earn, you know, call it $1.25 or $1.37, depending on what your tax rate is. You can instead give a security directly to that charity or a donor advised fund, so that you're meeting that charitable intent. And of course, often you've paid less than $1 because the asset is now worth $1. So, you know, and you can also get the deduction. So, you know, just, you know, on the way out, thought I'd share that as something that, again, I'm kind of surprised how few people know. Most people, as wonderfully charitable as our country is, and there's a lot of statistics that shows we are by far the most generous country in the world, you know, the vast majority of people continue to write checks to those charities. I give to West Point and my church every year with securities.
Yeah. No, when you taught me that, I mean, it blew my mind that we could do it that way. You could literally gift the 10,000 in stocks, you know, and kind of, you know, take the tax advantage there, and then take the 10,000 that you were going to cut a check and just buy right back in. You're just buying at a higher basis. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that you know, of all the books that I've read, it wasn't ever made that simple. And so I'm grateful for that lesson learned. And yeah, everybody should go figure out how to do that, because it just makes so much sense.
You bet. Well, I really appreciate you having me. I'm happy to stay on. not trying to end it, but I wanted to make sure I said thank you, because it's always great. I'm hugely honored to be a part of your family's life, and just honestly, I don't know how you do it all. I know you're about to release your book, so between that and being a foster parent and running a business, I'm pretty sure you figured out a way to find 30 hours in every 24-hour day. Somehow you've managed to find that, crack that nut.
Good people, my man. Good people like you helping me out. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for your time, Brian. And thanks for bringing some value on this topic. There's more than one way to do a deal. There's more than one way to pass wealth. There's more than one way to build wealth. I think the more people know what's out there, I think it helps them. Ultimately, I think we all have to get deep in our niche to really make a big step. But man, the more options we know, the more we can take care of people. And to me, that's what it's about. Just take care of people. And this is a way you can take care of your family. So we call this the Go Giver, but I do want anyone who is on this to reach out to our firm, and certainly don't feel any obligation other than for us to provide a resource. And we've got 9 people at our firm, so one of us will get back to you with your questions, and I'm happy to share with Schuyler and his team how to reach our firm if anything comes up. There's certainly a lot that's going to get done between now and year end, and particularly now and end of 2025. I would say, not to sound melodramatic, but jump on these things before the second half of next year. I could be wrong. We never know with our elections, etc. But it's very likely that a lot of the things that you want to get done, like we've talked about today, are going to be difficult to get done in the second half of next year. After that, it will be fine. But if a law sunsets, then there's going to be kind of an oversubscription of good tax resources and valuation resources, estate attorneys. Again, I hope I'm wrong, but planning for that, and if you're done with it ahead of everyone else, then all the better. Yep. Well, I hear about it, so it's good. All right, my friend. Well, I'm gonna let you go. I appreciate everybody tuning in. Obviously, reach out to us with any needs that or any other further questions that you have that you want us to get answers to. And just grateful for everyone's feedback. We come up with content from you all asking us. So grateful for that. But God bless you guys, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you, sir. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate you.